Jacques de Molay, The Last Templar and the Price of Truth. A calming medieval mystery for sleep, sound of distant, solemn medieval chanting with soft, ambient church bells fading in subtly. Narrator. Welcome, travelers of time and myth, to Forgotten Scrolls. Have you ever felt betrayed by those you trusted most? Have you wondered how power, faith, and ambition can destroy even the most loyal of men? This is a story that not only narrates facts, but reveals the depths of the human soul. Tonight, we will journey through one of the most somber and fascinating chapters of medieval history. In this odyssey, you will learn about Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Order of the Temple. From his formative days to his tragic end in the flames of injustice, you will discover how an upright man faced a relentless machine of political and religious interests. We will unveil documents, testimonies, and contexts that even today deeply stir historians and believers alike. This is not just a story from the past. It is an eternal warning about the price of truth. During our journey, you will understand how the Order of the Temple emerged, its role in the Crusades, its immense financial power, and its sudden collapse. But you will also witness the heart of a man who would not bend, not even in the face of pain or lies. Each chapter has been designed so you can relax, reflect, and immerse yourself deeply in the narrative without haste, as if you were listening to a story by the warmth of a medieval campfire. This documentary is ideal for those who feel they have been unjustly judged, for those who seek answers beyond the obvious, or simply for those who love to understand the secrets that time sought to hide. Here you will find knowledge, calm, and a narrative that will gently envelop you, like the whisper of an old sage in the dim light of an ancient library. So prepare yourself, settle in, and let the words carry you away. If you enjoy this type of historical content, with a relaxing yet profound approach, don't forget to follow our channel. There are many more stories waiting to be unearthed, and this one, the tale of Jacques de Molay, is just the beginning. Chapter 1. The Land of Crusaders. The 11th century was a time of religious fervor, sacred violence, and territorial ambition. Europe was shaken by the Crusades, expeditions organized by Christian kingdoms to reclaim Jerusalem and other lands considered holy. These campaigns were driven by the papacy and supported by nobles who saw in them a path to spiritual redemption and political power. In this world of sword and faith, Jacques de Molay was born around the year 1243. His birthplace was the Franche-Comté region in eastern France, a land of castles, dense forests, and deep Catholic tradition. There, among hills and stone villages, he grew up observing Templar soldiers pass by and hearing stories of glory in the east. His family belonged to the lesser nobility, without great wealth, but with a strong sense of duty and honor. As a youth, he showed an inclination for discipline and silence. Jacques' childhood was marked by an education focused on faith and combat. He learned to ride a horse, wield a sword, and memorize scriptures like every noble's son who aspired to serve in military orders. In local monasteries, he heard talk of the Holy Land, of Saladin, of the fall of Jerusalem, and how the Templars fought to protect Christian pilgrims. Those stories ignited a fire within him. Crusaders returned with scars and relics, recounting miracles and betrayals in distant lands. Many were received as heroes, others as martyrs. Young Jacques observed them with admiration, and in his heart grew a desire to join that divine mission. On his village church walls, frescoes depicted apocalyptic scenes, reminding him that fighting for Christ was saving one's soul. That vision would mark his destiny. Europe at that time was not only experiencing religious wars, but also a profound transformation in its power structure. Kings were beginning to consolidate their territories, trade was expanding, and the role of the clergy increased. Amidst this panorama, military orders gained prestige and economic power. The Templars, in particular, stood out for their wealth, organization, and obedience to Rome, which made them indispensable but also dangerous. The Crusades were not only military campaigns, but political and economic ventures. The Templars not only fought, but also administered lands, banks, and trade routes. Their expansion worried some monarchs, especially those who felt their sovereignty threatened. Jacques would grow up under this increasing tension between crown and cross. From a young age, he understood that faith could unite but also divide. News of the Crusades arrived through heralds, monks, and wandering soldiers. They recounted battles in Acre, alliances with Saracens, and broken pacts. These stories inflamed the spirit of many young nobles who saw in the crusade not only a duty, but an opportunity for fame. Jacques was no exception. His conviction was deep: to serve God, fight with honor, and protect the weak. At 20 years old, Jacques de Molay made a decision that would change his life forever. He left behind his home, his homeland, and the comfort of his family, and embarked on a journey to southern France to request entry into the Order of the Temple. He sought neither gold nor glory, but a higher purpose. Discipline, silence, and monastic life attracted him as much as the sword and adventure. Entry into the order was not easy. It required passing tests, demonstrating purity of intentions, and accepting strict vows. The Order of the Temple was a closed community, with its own rules and an austere lifestyle. New recruits were observed for months to ensure they were not seeking the temple for greed or worldly ambition. Jacques was accepted after a rigorous evaluation. At that time, the order's headquarters in France was an imposing place, fortified and full of Christian symbols. There, Jacques began his formal training as a Templar. He studied the order's rules, trained with veterans, and participated in religious ceremonies. Life was hard, without luxuries or distractions. They rose at dawn, prayed, trained, and served the poor. Templar spirituality combined monastic devotion with military discipline. They were soldiers of Christ, but also monks at war. They could not own property, speak without permission, or retreat from the battlefield. They had to fight without fear and die without complaining. These rules forged Jacques' character, who excelled in his seriousness, humility, and resilience. As years passed, Jacques was assigned to various missions within Europe. He supervised properties, resolved legal disputes, and attended order ceremonies. Although he had not yet traveled to the Holy Land, he felt his preparation advancing. His reputation grew among his brothers for his good sense and firmness. He was not a charismatic leader, but a reliable man. The order faced increasing criticism from certain sectors of the clergy and royal courts. They were accused of arrogance, accumulating power, and hidden secrets. The Templars remained silent, faithful to their vows and their mission. Jacques learned to navigate these tensions with prudence, without falling into provocations. His training had taught him to observe before acting. Meanwhile, in the East, the Crusader kingdoms suffered constant attacks. The fall of Acre in 1291 marked the end of the last Christian stronghold in the Holy Land. The news was a devastating blow to all Christian Europe. The Templars, Hospitallers, and other orders had to rethink their role. Jacques, though still in Europe, felt the shock of this defeat. Acre had been a symbol of resistance and hope. Its loss represented not only a military defeat, but a spiritual failure. Many began to question the purpose of the Crusades. Had so much sacrifice been worth it? Had divine favor been lost? In this context of uncertainty, the figure of Jacques de Molay began to gain relevance as a defender of the order's continuity. The reorganization of the Templars was urgent. Without the Holy Land to protect, their role had to be redefined. Some proposed merging with other orders, others wished to withdraw. Jacques, however, defended the need to keep the Templar structure intact. He believed there was still a mission to fulfill, both spiritual and humanitarian. This vision would propel him towards leadership. In the late 11th century, the Templar headquarters in Cyprus became the new center of operations. There, efforts were concentrated to reconquer the Holy Land, establish new alliances, and keep the Crusader cause alive. Jacques was sent to Cyprus, where his ideas gained strength among his brothers. His experience, maturity, and firmness made him stand out in internal councils. The political context was tense. The papacy sought to centralized spiritual power, while European kings wished to limit the influence of religious orders. France, in particular, viewed Templar financial power with suspicion. Although it was not yet known, a storm was brewing that would change the destiny of Jacques and the entire order. The balance between crown and cross was about to break, but at that moment, what Jacques saw was an opportunity to serve with greater intensity. He was not concerned with intrigues, but with strengthening the faith and unity of his brothers. He believed that with obedience and prayer, they could overcome any adversity. This spirit would soon lead him to occupy the highest office, Grand Master of the Temple. The weight of centuries of history would fall on his shoulders. The story of Jacques de Molay cannot be understood without comprehending the era that shaped him. A time where religion, war, and politics were inseparable, where a man could be both saint and warrior at the same time. His life intertwined with the decline of the Crusades and the struggle for the soul of Europe. This first chapter is merely the opening door to one of the most moving stories of the Middle Ages. Chapter 2. The Call of the Sword. In the year 1265, at little more than 20 years old, Jacques de Molay was officially accepted into the Order of the Temple. His initiation ceremony took place at the Templar house in Beaune, where he took his vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. From that moment, he left behind his civil identity and consecrated himself completely to the Templar ideal. The sword would no longer be just a weapon, but an extension of his consecrated soul. His first years of training were intense and rigorous. He learned to survive on the bare minimum, to live in silence, and to obey without questioning. The routine began before dawn with prayers, followed by physical training and spiritual readings. A Templar's life allowed no luxuries, no personal ties, no private opinions outside the council. Everything was for the order and for God. The temple was not simply an army, but a perfectly structured organization. Every brother had a clear role, from the master to the squire. Jacques excelled in his ability to learn quickly and in his relentless discipline. He was not the strongest or the fastest, but he was the most consistent. Superiors soon noticed his serene and reliable leadership ability. During his apprenticeship, Jacques traveled to various Templar houses in France and Burgundy. These properties were true centers of power, with churches, fortifications, agricultural lands, and even banks. There, he became familiar with economic management, the administration of justice, and diplomatic relations with nobles and kings. The temple did not just fight, it also governed. As he delved into Templar life, Jacques understood the dimensions of the power they represented. They were respected as holy warriors, but also feared as bankers and political advisors. Their independence from civil power generated hidden enmities. Although still young, Jacques intuited that the sword he wielded served both to protect and to provoke discomfort. His first assignment outside France was to the island of Cyprus, where the temple had established its base after the fall of Acre. There he encountered the military heart of the order, where future crusades were planned and new knights were trained. Cyprus was a crossroads of cultures. Greeks, Latins, Saracens, and merchants coexisted in a tense climate. Jacques adapted quickly to that environment. On the island, Jacques participated in coastal patrols, defense of fortresses, and negotiations with emissaries from other Christian kingdoms. He witnessed how the order stayed alive despite defeats. There he learned that not every war is won with swords. Alliances, financial resources, and information were as important as combat. War was fought on many fronts. One of his most influential superiors was Master Guillaume de Beaujeu, who died defending Acre. The death of that leader deeply affected Jacques. From then on, he felt that one day he should assume greater responsibilities, not out of ambition, but out of loyalty to those who had fallen with honor. The idea of leadership slowly settled in his consciousness. Life among the Templar brothers was demanding. Absolute obedience was a sacred pillar. Open discussions or complaints were not allowed. Any breach of the rule was punished with penance, seclusion, or expulsion. Jacques respected the rules with devotion, but also showed compassion for brothers who faltered. His humanity contrasted with the harshness of many veterans. Throughout his years in Cyprus, Jacques began to be sent as an emissary on diplomatic missions. He visited kings, bishops, and nobles across Europe, negotiating loans, protecting Templar assets, and seeking support for new campaigns. In these missions, he demonstrated political skill, sobriety in his dealings, and fidelity to the order's interests. He was a silent yet firm knight. In one of his trips to Rome, he became closely acquainted with the tensions between the papacy and the military orders. The Vatican respected the temple's power, but also wished to limit its autonomy. Jacques perceived that beyond the Crusades, a political game was brewing where every word could become a sword. He understood that the real battle would take place in the corridors of power. Contact with the Holy See also allowed him to study ancient documents, papal bulls, and Templar archives. He immersed himself in the deep history of the order, from its beginnings to its mistakes. He learned that past glory did not guarantee the future. The lessons of the past would be his shield when dark times arrived, and those times were already in the air. Little by little, Jacques gained authority within the command circles, not by imposition, but by the trust he inspired. He became an advisor to several masters and commander of important houses. He supervised castles, managed resources, and evaluated recruits. The sword he had taken in Bayonne now commanded men and protected ideals. The temple then faced growing criticism from certain sectors of the clergy. They were accused of accumulating wealth without accountability. Donations that once flowed now dwindled. Kings, especially Philip IV of France, viewed such a powerful and independent order with suspicion. Jacques warned that the enemy was no longer only in the east, but at home. The Order of the Temple had been founded to protect pilgrims and holy sites, but with the loss of Jerusalem, that mission was in crisis. Many questioned their raison d'être. Jacques believed they could still serve as defenders of Christendom, now from Europe. But for that, it was necessary to adapt without losing their essence. That was his greatest internal battle. In his letters to other brothers, Jacques insisted on unity, humility, and preparation. He knew that enemies would look for internal cracks to weaken them. He promoted spiritual formation as much as military training. A Templar should not only be strong, but wise. Faith had to be the strongest armor. Without it, everything would fall like a sandcastle. One of the decisive moments was his participation in a general chapter in 1291 after the fall of Acre. There, the future of the order was discussed. Some proposed merging with the Hospitallers, others called for a pause in activities. Jacques respectfully but firmly opposed this. He said that the temple had to remain independent, faithful to its origin, and renewed in spirit. His words resonated deeply among those present. Many veterans saw in him the leader the order needed. He was not a legendary warrior or a rich noble, but his integrity was unshakable. He represented the old Templar school, that of sacrifice and divine mission. His vision was supported, and his prestige grew. That call of the sword was no longer personal. It was collective. Jacques did not yet know that his name would be marked by history as the last Grand Master, but he felt his path was leading him to a higher role. He did not seek power, but meaning. Every battle, every mass, every word he uttered brought him closer to that destiny. The sword he had sworn to serve now asked him to become its final guardian. Thus, Jacques de Molay transformed from a young noble from Franche-Comté into a pillar of the Order of the Temple, a man tempered by iron, but guided by faith. His call was not for glory, but for purpose, and that conviction would lead him years later to the very heart of one of the greatest tragedies in medieval history. Chapter 3. The Knights of the Temple. The Order of the Temple, also known as the Poor Knights of Christ, was founded in 1119 in Jerusalem by 9 French Crusaders. Their initial mission was to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land after the First Crusade. Under the patronage of the Church, they rapidly grew in number and power. Their base was established in the ancient Temple of Solomon, from which they would take their name. The Templars combined the monastic ideal with military life. They were warrior monks consecrated to God, who swore obedience, chastity, and poverty. They lived under a strict rule written by Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the great spiritual leaders of the time. This rule established precise norms for their behavior, from diet to combat. They wore white tunics with a red cross, symbolizing purity and bloodshed for Christ. They could not laugh loudly, speak without permission, or look women in the eye. They slept dressed, ready for combat at any moment. Their austerity was as profound as their fame on the battlefield. They quickly became a symbol of unwavering faith. The order's prestige increased after their victories in Palestine and Syria. Kings and nobles donated lands, castles, and even entire populations to them in Europe. The temple accumulated economic power through a network of agricultural properties, fortresses, and financial centers. Many nobles preferred to leave their wealth to the order rather than to their heirs. Trust in them was absolute. They managed loans, protected treasures, and offered safeguarding services to merchants and kings. They invented early forms of international banking, where a merchant could deposit money in Paris and withdraw it in Acre. This made them the most powerful bankers in the medieval world. Their immense wealth would also bring them silent enemies. Within the order, there were well-defined hierarchies. There were knights who fought on horseback, sergeants who served on foot, chaplains who officiated masses, and squires who aspired to rise in rank. All answered to the Grand Master, the highest figure elected by secret ballot. The internal system was as rigorous as that of any European kingdom. Templar fortresses were jewels of military architecture, resisting prolonged sieges and dominating strategic routes. Crac des Chevaliers in Syria and Tortosa in Lebanon were examples of their defensive engineering. Jacques de Molay visited many of these fortresses during his years of service. There he understood that the temple's power was not only spiritual. The Templars were also feared for their tactics on the battlefield. They fought in close formation, launching charges with precision and discipline. Their mere presence instilled respect among the Saracens and other military orders. However, they also made mistakes. Their arrogance in certain sieges and their refusal to cooperate with other orders caused internal friction. Despite their fame, a Templar's life was neither easy nor glamorous. They lived in silence, ate moderately, and trained constantly. Wounds, illnesses, and martyrdom were common. Many died young without ever returning to their homeland. Jacques de Molay saw in them an example of total dedication, which reinforced his vocation and sense of belonging. The order had natural enemies: the Muslims who wanted to reclaim the territories taken by the Crusaders, the European nobles who envied their wealth, and some clerics who criticized their autonomy. Still, they remained firm, obedient to the Pope, and willing to die without questioning orders. This rigidity was their strength, and later, their weakness. Throughout the 11th century, the Templars were essential in defending the last Christian enclaves in the Holy Land. They were among the last to abandon Jerusalem and resisted until the end in Acre. After its fall, many died defending their positions, while others were captured or killed without trial. The temple had fulfilled its mission with blood. The return to Europe was a blow for many. The Templars were no longer needed as before. Without the Holy Land, their military function was questioned. Some proposed their dissolution, others their fusion with the Hospitallers. The order resisted, defending its identity and future projects. Jacques de Molay would be one of those who would defend that cause with the most fervor. The Templars did not answer to kings, but to the Pope. This independence became increasingly intolerable for monarchies. Philip IV of France, in particular, had enormous debts to the order and resented its financial power. He began to spread rumors and prepare the ground for an open confrontation. The temple did not know it, but it was already in his sights. Despite the growing tension, the order continued to function normally. They continued to administer lands, help the poor, and train new knights. Jacques, from his leadership roles, promoted the order's original purity. He sought a return to the foundational values, away from politics and focused on spirituality and service. Relations with other orders were cordial but competitive. Hospitallers, Teutonic Knights, and Templars often clashed over resources or influence. The Church tried to mediate, but the interests were enormous. Jacques understood that the unity of Christendom was at risk and advocated for discreet alliances. He was a silent strategist, more political than warrior. The Temple maintained an admirable intelligence network. They had emissaries in all Christian kingdoms and secret ambassadors in Muslim lands. They knew of conspiracies before the kings themselves. Still, they did not anticipate the magnitude of the attack that would come from Paris. Confidence in their prestige made them lower their guard against internal threats. Many young nobles still wanted to join the order. They saw in it a path to spiritual redemption, adventure, and purpose. But the old Templars knew the world had changed. The Crusades were no longer a priority. Faith was negotiated in councils, not on battlefields. Jacques tried to train the new recruits in this dual spiritual and political reality. Despite the difficulties, the Templars continued to enjoy popular support. In many regions, they were seen as protectors of the people. They helped in famines, defended roads, and offered justice where the kingdom reached. Jacques strove to maintain that bond with the people. He knew that if they lost that support, they would be vulnerable to the crown's power. For many, the Temple was a nation without borders. It answered to no kingdom, and that made it a threat. Yet its internal structure was fragile against a coordinated offensive. They had no permanent army or strong alliances. Jacques understood they had to prepare to defend against something more subtle: defamation. Swords would not be enough against words. The Knights of the Temple had been the shield of Christendom for 2 centuries, but their power, accumulated with devotion and blood, would soon be seen as arrogance. And in a Europe where politics surpassed faith, that would come at a very high price. Jacques de Molay, faithful to his oath, would not see it coming until it was too late. Chapter 4. Vows of Iron. Entering the Order of the Temple was not simply about wearing a red cross and carrying a sword. It was about renouncing the world, possessions, family, even one's own name. The vows that sealed entry were considered sacred, inviolable, binding until death. Once pronounced, the brother no longer belonged to himself, but to God and the Temple. Jacques de Molay knew them by heart: poverty, chastity, and obedience. They were more than words. They were spiritual shackles that transformed the common man into an absolute servant. The vow of poverty implied renouncing all possessions. What a Templar! Used, ate, or touched belonged to the order. Even clothes were shared among brothers. The vow of chastity demanded a total separation from earthly pleasures. Not only was sex forbidden, but also emotional closeness. A Templar could not write to his mother without permission. He could not have friends outside the order. Love was seen as a dangerous distraction. His only passion was to be Christ crucified and sacred duty. The strictest was the vow of obedience. A Templar had to obey orders without hesitation, even if they implied mortal danger. He could not give opinions, debate, or refuse a mission. The hierarchy was sacred, and every order was seen as a manifestation of divine will. Jacques understood that without obedience, the order would collapse. It was their backbone. These vows were sealed in a solemn ceremony where the candidate knelt before the master and chaplain. Surrounded by brothers, he answered a series of questions about his faith, intention, and purity. Then he placed his hand on the Gospels and swore before God. There was no turning back. Not even the Pope could free him from that commitment. Jacques de Molay lived that ceremony with profound emotion. He knew he was surrendering his soul to a life of discipline. He did not cry, did not tremble, did not doubt. That night he slept on the stone floor, like everyone else, wrapped in a rough blanket and in absolute silence. From then on, every day was a rigorous repetition of prayer, work, and vigilance. The routine was relentless. They rose before dawn, prayed psalms in groups, ate in silence, and trained with the sword for hours. They could not speak during meals. Only the designated reader could break the silence by reciting sacred texts. Even conversations between brothers were brief and formal under strict rules. The Templar's body was seen as an instrument of service. They did not adorn themselves, did not use perfume, did not expose their skin. Fasting was frequent, rest scarce. Their beds were wooden planks. They slept dressed with their sword within reach, not out of fear, but out of preparedness. An attack could come at any moment. War had no schedule. The punishment for breaking vows was severe. Stealing food, disobeying, lying, or showing pride were offenses punished with public humiliation or even expulsion. Jacques witnessed internal trials where the guilty were brought to their knees before the entire community. They confessed with tears and were either forgiven or condemned according to the council's judgment. However, mercy also existed. Templars believed in sincere repentance. A fallen brother could be reinstated if he showed true sorrow. Jacques excelled at balancing justice and compassion in these trials. He understood that harshness without soul was not virtue. He guided with firmness, but also with understanding towards human weakness. The temple's rule contained over 600 articles. It was a complete code that regulated everything from dress to greeting. It dictated how bread should be cut, how one should ride, and what words to use when praying. Nothing was left to chance. Perfection was the ideal, though unattainable. Constant effort was the true path. During internal councils, these vows were reviewed, and brothers' errors were publicly read. This was done with the intention of purifying the community, not shaming it. It was a moment of humility and reflection. Jacques considered these acts essential. A Templar had to examine himself honestly so as not to deviate from the path. The vows were not just internal rules. They were also a promise to the outside world. Templars inspired respect because they were incorruptible. They could guard royal treasures without stealing a single coin. They could resist temptations that would make any noble fall. Their word was law. The people's trust was a direct consequence of their integrity. Many kings deposited entire fortunes in Templar hands without fear. They knew that neither bribery nor threats could break a vow. Jacques was concerned with preserving that reputation. He ordered surprise inspections in Templar houses to ensure strict adherence to the vows. The temple's honor was at stake every day. However, as years passed, some Templars began to relax. Excess power, accumulation of assets, and distance from the Holy Land cooled the original fervor. Jacques sadly observed these deviations. He tried to correct them with exhortations, sanctions, and spiritual retreats. His struggle was not only against external enemies, sometimes the enemy was within. Some Templars grew arrogant about their status, others sought comfort or prestige. The iron vows began to rust. Jacques remained firm, leading by example. He slept little, ate sparingly, worked tirelessly. His austerity was his banner. He wanted to restore the temple's lost purity. On several occasions, Jacques proposed internal reforms, not to soften the rules, but to strengthen them. He asked for more spiritual vigilance, more theological study, more silent retreats. He wished every brother to remember why they had entered the temple. They were not disguised nobles, they were armed servants of God. Their cause was eternal, not worldly. He also strove to maintain unity. Internal disputes were dangerous. A fracture in the vows could open the door to external enemies. In secret councils, he discussed with high-ranking officials the best strategies to preserve fidelity. Not all agreed, but they respected his leadership. His voice carried weight among veterans. Obedience was tested whenever the Pope or a king issued contradictory orders. Whom to obey? Jacques taught that the temple should be faithful to the Pope, but without yielding to abuses of civil power. This diplomatic stance earned him respect and also suspicion. Philip the Thor would not tolerate such independence, but the vows were stronger than threats. Templar vows were as hard as the stones of their castles, but they were also the soul of the order. Without them, the temple was just another army. Jacques de Molay knew this. His entire life was a constant defense of these iron vows until his last breath. They were his cross, his shield, and his destiny. Chapter 5. Holy Land and Holy Blood. The Holy Land, as the Crusaders called Palestine, was the spiritual heart of medieval Christendom. Jerusalem, with its sacred walls, was seen as the place where faith, history, and the hope of redemption converged. For the Templars, defending that soil was not just a military task, it was a divine mission. To die, there was to die in grace. From his entry, Jacques de Molay dreamed of serving in the Holy Land. His superiors first sent him to Cyprus, where the order was reorganizing after losing Jerusalem in 1187. But the true battlefield still pulsed beyond the sea. Finally, in 1270, Jacques first set foot on Syrian soil with a heart full of fervor. Templar cities like Tortosa, Gaza, and Acre were colossal fortresses located at strategic points. Jacques was initially assigned to a garrison near Tripoli, where he supervised coastal patrols and caravans. There, he learned that the enemy did not always come with turban and scimitar. Sometimes it was hunger, disease, or betrayal. Relations between Templars and local populations were complex. Some Eastern Christians viewed the Crusaders as invaders. Muslims, though declared enemies, sometimes negotiated truces and safe passage. Jacques tried to understand these dynamics, avoiding unnecessary conflicts, but without yielding on the essential point, protecting the sacred. During his stay in Acre, he witnessed several skirmishes and minor sieges. The enemy was no longer an organized army, but constant groups relentlessly harassing them. Every day was a threat. Jacques excelled in his cool-headedness. He did not give in to anger or fear. His leadership in combat began to be noticed. The most intense battle he experienced was the final siege of Acre in 1291. The Templars defended their fortress fiercely as the walls fell one by one. Jacques fought sword in hand, shoulder to shoulder with his brothers. Christian and Muslim blood covered the stones. There was no retreat. It was resist or die as martyrs. When the walls finally gave way, most of the defenders were massacred. Jacques miraculously survived, along with a small group who escaped by sea. The pain of that defeat marked him forever, not only for the lives lost, but because he understood that Christendom had abandoned the Holy Land permanently. The retreat to Cyprus was a moral blow for the entire order. The Templars, who had been born to guard the sacred places, no longer had a place to guard. Jacques secluded himself in prayer for weeks, seeking meaning amidst the chaos. His faith did not waver, but his worldview changed. He understood that the war had entered a new phase. The loss of Jerusalem had already been a severe setback years earlier, but Acre was the end. From then on, the Templars ceased to be a frontier army. They became a wandering institution, without a land of their own. Jacques then promoted an idea: to preserve the spiritual mission, even if they no longer had a fortress to defend. In internal meetings, he proposed focusing efforts on training holy knights willing to fight evil in all its forms, not just with swords, but with knowledge, faith, and example. Many supported his vision, though not all. Some veterans wanted to reconquer the Holy Land at all costs. Jacques was more prudent. He knew that time does not turn back. However, he did not abandon hope of returning someday. He promoted the formation of new alliances with European kingdoms, seeking support for a new crusade. He sent emissaries to Rome, England, and Aragon. But the winds had changed. Kings were more concerned with their territories than with the bloodshed in Jerusalem. The Pope also showed ambiguity. Although he blessed Templar efforts, he offered no real resources. The Temple began to be seen as an inconvenient power rather than a bastion of faith. Jacques perceived that his duty was no longer only military. He had to defend the spiritual legacy that so many had sealed with their blood. During those years, he wrote several letters to other military orders seeking unity. He invited them to set aside rivalries and remember the common cause. The Holy Land was not just a geographical location. It was a promise, a symbol, and it had to be kept alive in the heart of every Christian knight, even if the sand no longer stained their boots. Meanwhile, the Muslims celebrated their victory. The Islamic world had reclaimed much of its historical territories, but even they respected the Templars. Many Muslim chroniclers describe Jacques as an honorable, brave, and wise leader. His reputation transcended creeds and borders. The years after Acre were difficult. Many Templar brothers returned to Europe disillusioned. Some fell into vices, others retired. Jacques did the opposite. He grew stronger. He traveled to Templar houses in France, Germany, and Castile, reinforcing discipline, preaching hope, and reorganizing the weakened structure. In every place, he recalled the battles fought in Palestine. He spoke of the martyrs of Acre, of the bleeding cross on the white tunic, of prayers at dawn amidst enemy arrows, not to fuel hatred, but to keep the flame alive. For Jacques, the Holy Land was an open wound, but also a banner that must not fall. Over time, new generations of Templars only knew the stories. They had not set foot in Jerusalem or fought in Tripoli. Jacques insisted that they had to be trained not only as warriors, but as guardians of an ideal. The Holy Land should not be forgotten. Though lost, it remained the spiritual heart of the temple. Many contemporary chroniclers affirm that Jacques de Molay always carried a handful of earth collected from the outskirts of Jerusalem. It was not superstition, but a symbol of commitment. Every time he made a decision, he remembered where he came from and what he fought for. For him, every decision had to be aligned with that sacred origin. Thus, although the temple no longer possessed castles in the east, its mission remained firm. Its sword, bathed in holy blood, was not just a weapon. It was a testament to centuries of struggle, prayer, and sacrifice. Jacques was one of the last who understood that deep connection between the land and the cross, and he would fight to preserve it until the end. Chapter 6: The Legacy of the Grail. The figure of the Holy Grail has fascinated generations, blending history and legend. According to tradition, it was the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper and later collected his blood on the cross. Some claimed that the Templars not only knew its whereabouts, but had secretly protected it. Jacques de Molay lived under the shadow of that mystery. During his time in the Holy Land, Jacques heard tales of relics hidden in ancient Christian chapels. Eastern monks spoke of sacred objects secretly transported during persecutions. The Grail appeared as a central symbol, surrounded by myths. Although there was no proof, the fervor it ignited was real and powerful. The Order of the Temple was often accused of guarding forbidden secrets, not out of greed, but due to their access to restricted sites and their independence from local clergy. Among manuscripts in forgotten languages and symbols carved in stone, clues were hidden. Jacques was interested in these documents, but with caution. He knew that faith had to prevail over obsession. One of the most mentioned enclaves was the Chapel of St. John in Acre. There, according to some brothers, parchments about relics brought from Jerusalem were kept. Jacques visited the place on several occasions. Although he found no extraordinary objects, he did discover detailed records of routes, transports, and concealments. Something had certainly been moved. In Europe, Templar castles were full of secret chambers. Not all served to protect material treasures. Some were sanctuaries where minor relics were venerated, bones of saints, fragments of the cross, ancient linens. For the medieval mind, these objects held enormous spiritual power. The Grail would then be the most sacred of all. Some chroniclers linked the Grail to Celtic tradition. Breton tales spoke of a magical cauldron that healed wounds and gave wisdom. The Templars, upon settling in regions like Scotland, mingled with these legends. Jacques received reports on Templar symbols in remote areas. He studied them carefully but did not fall into fantasy. Beyond the physical object, the Grail represented an ideal: purity, sacrifice, and communion with the divine. Jacques taught this to his brothers. They were not seeking a cup, but the truth of Christ. That inner quest was more important than any tangible relic. However, the rumor of the Grail continued to grow, even within the order itself. During a council in Paris, some brothers discussed the advisability of revealing the secrets they possessed. They feared that if the temple fell, these relics would be profaned. Jacques refused. He believed that spiritual protection was more effective than any stone fortress. Faith was the true shield, not walls or silence. In Roncesvalles in the Pyrenees, the legend circulated that the Templars had hidden the Grail in a secret cave. Others said it was taken to Scotland after the fall of Acre. Although Jacques C. never confirmed or denied these stories, he sent discreet emissaries to investigate. He sought not fame, but to preserve what might be sacred. One of his closest knights, Etienne de Vignolles, returned from a trip to northern Spain with a strange codex. It described unknown Christic rituals, unfamiliar to official liturgy. It was not heretical, but it was disturbing. Jacques ordered it stored in a sealed cell, accessible only to high-ranking officials. He understood that certain knowledge required spiritual maturity. The fascination with the Grail was not only Christian. Some Muslim scholars also mentioned it, though with other names. They called it the Prophet's Cup, the Vessel of Wisdom, or the Vessel of Light. Jacques corresponded with some of them. He wanted to understand if there was a deeper connection between seemingly opposing religions. As time passed, the temple's enemies used these legends against it. They said the Templars practiced secret rites, invoked demons, and drank blood from dark chalices. All of it was false, but difficult to refute. Jacques lamented that the purest symbol of Christianity was used to tarnish the knight's reputation. Despite this, he continued to promote the study and guardianship of ancient texts. In several Templar houses in France, he established restricted libraries. There, apocryphal gospels, mystical treatises, and chronicles of the Crusades were preserved. They were not for everyone. Only the most prepared could access them, guided by prudence and faith. Some claimed that the Grail was not a cup, but a woman, Mary Magdalene, a symbolic interpretation where the blood was Christ's lineage. Jacques knew these writings, but considered them dangerous speculations. Although he did not entirely forbid them, he warned that they diverted from the core of the gospel. Christ had to be the center, not conjectures. In a manuscript attributed to Hugues de Payens, founder of the temple, an object brought from Jerusalem and hidden in the West was mentioned. It was not named as the Grail, but the description matched the legends. Jacques ordered the text copied and kept it in his Parisian residence. It was never found after his arrest and is presumed lost. For many Templar brothers, the Grail was a promise of redemption. It represented the final reward for the faithful knight. It was not gold or glory, but union with God. Jacques repeated this in his speeches. He who fights for justice without fear or hatred will attain the spiritual Grail. It was a message that moved more than any physical relic. Before his arrest, Jacques confessed to one of his chaplains that if the Grail existed, it should not be in human hands. It was too sacred for human pride. He preferred it to be lost in time rather than turned into a trophy. His vision was clear. The sacred is guarded with humility, not with chains or display cases. The legacy of the Grail under Jacques' gaze was internal. It was about living a righteous life. Without betraying faith or conscience, he did not need a cup to feel the divine presence. A pure heart, a sincere prayer, and the memory of those who died for the love of Christ were enough. That, for him, was the true Grail. Even in prison, according to testimonies, Jacques repeated psalms linked to the Passion of Christ. Some jailers said they saw him gaze at the sky in silence, as if drinking from an invisible source. Perhaps he did not hold the Grail in his hands, but he carried it in his soul, and for him, that was enough. Chapter 7. The Grand Master's Ascent. After the fall of Acre and the retreat to Cyprus, the Order of the Temple was wounded, but not destroyed. It was necessary to reorganize, heal, and plan for the future. The office of Grand Master had become vacant after the death of Guillaume de Beaujeu. Among the names that emerged, one was repeated with force, Jacques de Molay. The brothers knew of his mettle, his experience in the Holy Land, and his unwavering integrity. He had fought at the Siege of Acre, survived the chaos, and maintained discipline. His leadership was not bombastic, but firm and silent. When he spoke, others listened. When he decided, he did so with clear vision and unshakable faith. In 1292, he was officially elected as the 23rd Grand Master of the Temple. The ceremony was solemn, celebrated in Cyprus with the presence of the order's high dignitaries. Jacques, aware of the weight resting upon him, accepted with humility, but without hesitation. He understood that he was guiding a revered institution that was equally watched. His first decision was to strengthen the moral and spiritual foundation of the Templars. He ordered acts of penance, collective fasts, and silent retreats. He did not seek to punish, but to purify. He wanted Templars who were conscious of their mission, not just routine soldiers. The order had to regain its foundational spirit, the one that had made them invincible in the past. In Cyprus, he promoted improvements in defensive infrastructure and internal administration. He appointed new commanders in key areas, prioritizing merit over lineage. He introduced rigorous audits to prevent corruption. His government was austere, but efficient. Soon, the temple's reputation began to rise once more. Furthermore, he began a delicate diplomatic work with European kingdoms. He visited Rome, where he was received by Pope Boniface, and then traveled to France. He established contacts with the English, Crown, the Kingdom of Aragon, and the German nobility. His goal was to build stable alliances necessary for a future crusade. The temple had to remain relevant. During his stay in France, he was received with honors by King Philip IV. At that time, relations were cordial. The monarch saw the Templars as a powerful and perhaps useful force. Jacques, for his part, perceived in him an excessive ambition. Although he smiled, he did not fully trust the so-called Iron King. His return to Cyprus brought new challenges. There were conflicts between Templars and Hospitallers over territorial control. Jacques convened a joint assembly in which he advocated for unity. His speech was clear. Without cooperation, faith weakened. Although tensions did not disappear, he managed to calm tempers and postpone major confrontations. As his figure grew, so did criticism from ecclesiastical and civilian sectors. Some accused him of arrogance, others of excessive power. But Jacques did not seek popularity. His duty was to protect and guide. He always responded with facts, never with empty speeches. His silence was often more eloquent than any words. One of his most ambitious projects was to reorganize the Templar archives. He ordered documents from each house to be collected and a centralized registry created in Paris. He wanted transparency, but also foresight. He knew that history had to be written by truth, not by rumors. Many of those documents would disappear years later during the persecution. Between 1295 and 1299, he visited multiple Templar strongholds in Europe. From Aragon to England, he inspected quarters, reviewed accounts, and spoke with his brothers. He was a present leader, not distant. He listened to concerns, gave instructions, and recalled the Templar ideal. His presence uplifted the knights' spirits and renewed their commitment. Despite the years, he did not abandon physical training or constant prayer. He slept little, ate frugally, and stayed in shape. Some said he still wore an iron chain under his tunic as a symbol of penance. His example was his best teaching. No brother could excuse himself if the Grand Master did it first. During his mandate, he also faced increasingly intense rumors about the supposed Templar treasure. Jacques knew the temple possessed wealth, but not in the mythical form that circulated. It was assets accumulated over centuries of donations, not hidden gold. He tried to combat these ideas, but popular imagination was more powerful than reason. On several occasions, he rejected loans to indebted nobles, including Philip IV himself. That refusal generated resentment. Jacques maintained that the temple's money should be used for pious works and defense of the faith, not to cover courtly luxuries or civil wars. It was a brave decision, but it sowed dangerous enmities. Despite everything, he showed no fear. He continued to fulfill his duty with exactitude. Every decision was thought through, consulted, and prayed over. He did not allow himself to be swayed by external pressures. He knew the temple was watched, but he could not compromise his principles. His fidelity to the rule was absolute, even when that meant confronting the powerful. In 1305, he supported the new Pope Clement V, hoping for a spiritual renewal in the church. However, he soon noticed that the new pontiff was impressionable. The shadow of Philip the Fork stretched over Rome. Jacques understood too late. Political maneuvers advanced in secret, while he continued to believe in dialogue and diplomacy. That same year, he presented a project to merge the main military orders under a single direction. He thought this would allow them to better face the enemies of the faith. The idea was well received by some but viewed with suspicion by others. The Hospitallers, in particular, opposed it. They feared losing autonomy under Templar leadership. Jacques defended the proposal with solid arguments. Fewer rivalries, more efficiency, a single voice before the Pope and kings, but his adversaries accused him of seeking personal supremacy. That smear campaign was one of the first steps towards his downfall. Although he didn't know it yet, his leadership was beginning to be eroded from within. Still, he did not abandon his responsibilities. He continued traveling, inspecting, preaching. He believed the temple still had a mission in this world. As long as there was injustice, war, or heresy, the Templars had to be ready. His faith did not weaken. His soul did not surrender. He was a soldier of Christ to the core, fearless of the future. His ascent to the office of Grand Master was not a coronation, but a heavy cross. But he bore it with dignity, courage, and conviction. He did not seek glory, he sought service, and in that service, he found his destiny. Jacques de Molay would not be remembered for his power, but for his integrity. His ascent marked the beginning of the temple's most critical stage. Chapter 8. The Shadow of King. Philip IV of France, nicknamed the Fair, was a monarch with a serene face and a calculating soul. His ambition knew no bounds, and his need for power mingled with a broken economy. He had entered into war with England and Flanders, leaving the royal coffers empty. And in the midst of that crisis, he looked at the temple with different eyes. The Templars possessed lands, castles, livestock, gold, and an administrative network more efficient than that of the state itself. Furthermore, they acted as a bank for nobles and kings. Philip was a client of the order, but also its debtor. That uncomfortable relationship soon became dangerous. The king desired Templar power, but without paying the price. Years before, he had tried to subdue Pope Boniface VIII, even briefly kidnapping him. His ambition did not stop at the sacred. After his death, he managed to influence the election of Clement V, moving the papacy to Avignon. With the pontiff under his shadow, Philip was ready to attack his new target, the Templars. The figure of Jacques de Molay was an obstacle to these plans. His integrity and firmness made him incorruptible. The king tried to entice him with flattery, inviting him to Paris in 1306. Jacques accepted without knowing he was entering the lion's den. He believed in diplomacy, not betrayal. But Philip was already weaving his web in the shadows. In the French courts, rumors about the Templars began to circulate. It was said they worshipped pagan idols, spat on the cross, denied Christ, and practiced secret rites, all without material proof. None of this was new. They were old slanders resurrected for convenience. Philip ordered the collection of testimonies under torture, even before presenting formal accusations. The Inquisition, which should have acted with prudence, was partly subdued by the king's pressure. Clement V wavered between his spiritual duty and political obedience. Philip did not want justice. He wanted to dismantle the order and seize its assets. The shadow of power spread like poison, slow but deadly. In secret, the king devised a meticulous plan. He drafted sealed letters addressed to his officials throughout the kingdom. They were to be opened at dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307. That day would be marked in history as the beginning of the greatest betrayal against a religious and military order ever seen in Europe. The order was clear: arrest all Templars simultaneously, seize their assets, and confiscate their documents. No one was to escape. Jacques de Molay was captured at the Temple House in Paris without resistance. He did not understand what was happening. He was accused of heresy, but there was no proof or trial yet, only chains. Philip justified the raid with a solemn speech to the people. He alleged that God had revealed the Templars' corruption, presenting them as enemies of faith, traitors disguised as saints. Many silently doubted, but in a France terrified by plague, war, and poverty, few dared to oppose the king. Jacques was interrogated for hours. At first, he refused to testify. Then, under pressure, he signed a dictated confession. Later, he retracted it. His will was firm, but his body began to give way. Philip used every statement as ammunition against the order. What he sought was not truth, but legitimacy for plunder. In Rome, Clement V received contradictory reports. At first, he condemned Philip's actions, but then, fearing a schism or a French invasion, he backed down. He convened a council to deal with the Templar case, but allowed the process to proceed. Instead of protecting, he chose to yield. The king's shadow was heavier than the cross. Meanwhile, confiscated assets filled the crown's coffers. These were not hidden treasures, but lands, furniture, vestments, books. Everything was sold, burned, or seized. Philip enriched his kingdom while destroying one of Christendom's most sacred institutions. Money spoke louder than justice. Public opinion began to divide. Some believed the accusations, others saw the Templars as martyrs. Jacques de Molay, even imprisoned, maintained his dignity. He did not insult, did not beg, did not betray. His silence was more eloquent than 1,000 defenses. The king's shadow grew denser, but he did not bend. Philip intensified interrogations, ordering more severe tortures, including the rack, fire, and water. Many knights confessed what their tormentors wanted to hear. Others died without speaking. Jacques resisted, as best he could. His body weakened, but his faith remained intact. He did not hate, he only prayed. The king tried to force the pope to dissolve the order without trial. Clement wavered, fearing scandal, but finally partly yielded, suspending the temple's functions and taking over the investigation. The order was paralyzed. Jacques, meanwhile, waited in his damp cell, still trusting in the truth. But truth was silenced by power. In his private letters, Philip wrote about the need to cleanse the kingdom. He presented himself as an internal crusader, fighting hidden enemies. But what he sought was to control banking, religious discourse, and foreign policy. The temple was just another obstacle on his path to absolute hegemony. Some nobles tried to intercede, asking for clemency for the Templars. Philip ignored them. He sought not reconciliation, but total submission. His goal was to erase the temple's name, absorb its structure, and rewrite history. The king's shadow allowed no nuances. Whoever disobeyed was destroyed. Later, Freemasonry would inherit part of Templar symbolism. Some believe this was a way to preserve their legacy in the face of destruction. Others deny it, but all agree on one thing. What Philip did was not justice, it was a purge, and Jacques de Molay became the most visible face of that martyrdom. The people, seeing the chained Templars parade, began to doubt. Were they really heretics or victims of power? Rumors grew, and the king's prestige began to crack. But it was already too late. The machinery was in motion. Philip's shadow had covered everything and would not stop growing until it devoured what was left of the temple. Jacques' figure, however, began to shine in the darkness. His integrity, his silence, and his faith made him a symbol. Though imprisoned, he was free. Though humiliated, he was dignified. Though betrayed, he remained faithful. The king's shadow never reached his soul. Chapter 9. The Cursed Treasure. From its founding, the order of the temple accumulated wealth through donations, conquests, and efficient administration. Their riches were not just gold and silver, but lands, castles, livestock, and valuable documents. They controlled trade routes and offered financial services. Their banking system was so advanced that even kings deposited their money there. Over the centuries, the myth of a hidden treasure arose. Some spoke of mountains of gold, others of sacred relics like the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant. The reality was more complex and less romantic. The Templars possessed wealth, yes, but it was dispersed and in the form of assets rather than buried chests. In the 14th century, the temple's financial records were perfectly documented. Each regional house reported to Paris, where information was centralized. Jacques de Molay insisted on transparency. There was no treasure as such, but a solid economic network, but that did not prevent popular imagination from growing. When Philip IV decided to destroy the order, one of his main motivations was that wealth. In his mind, he imagined vaults full of hidden gold beneath the temple in Paris. He ordered its immediate confiscation, but upon entering, they found nothing more than books, robes, chalices, letters, and some coins. The great treasure was not there. The king could not accept such an emptiness. He knew the Templars had hidden it. He ordered other properties searched: churches, fortresses, farms. They excavated, plundered, and questioned under torture. No one revealed anything because such a treasure simply did not exist as they imagined it. Templar silence increased suspicion and royal obsession. One of the most persistent rumors claimed that the treasure was moved at the last minute to La Rochelle. From its port, ships would have sailed toward Scotland or Portugal. There is no conclusive evidence, but the legend persists. Some believe the gold was given to other orders or buried under crypts. It all remains speculation. In Portugal, the Templars managed to reorganize under the name of the Order of Christ. There they continued with part of their legacy, including properties and symbols. Some historians believe that some of the treasure may have reached that territory, but no later discovery confirmed such theories. The Inquisitors tried to use the idea of the treasure to justify the arrests. They said the Templars hid it out of pride or heresy. Philip needed results, and finding nothing irritated him. He began to suspect the judges themselves and even the Pope. His paranoia grew with the silence of empty coffers. The king's obsession with the treasure led him to review the confiscated archives. In them were maps, accounting records, diplomatic letters, but no precise indication of a hidden treasure. Jacques de Molay, directly interrogated, repeated, "There is no hidden gold. We only have what has always been visible." They did not believe him. Over time, Philip's frustration turned into fury. He used the lack of treasure as proof of betrayal. He alleged they had deliberately hidden it to harm the crown. Thus, he justified the extension of torture. He wanted not only the gold, but a confession that would validate his ambition. But the Templars resisted. One of the strangest accounts emerged from a sailor in Marseille who claimed to have transported a secret Templar cargo. He swore he saw heavy chests protected by armed knights sailing to distant lands. But the destination was never identified, nor were those ships found. Perhaps a lie, perhaps buried truth. The legend grew richer with the centuries. Writers, alchemists, and explorers sought the Templar treasure as if it were the source of all wealth. From caves in the Pyrenees to cellars in Scotland, thousands of theories arose, but none with firm proof. The treasure remained a mystery. Some scholars suggest that the true treasure was spiritual: knowledge, books, esoteric wisdom. Others believe it consisted of secrets about Christ's lineage or the Holy Grail, ideas fueled by centuries of occultism. But in Jacques' time, real value lay in the land, the Templars' labor and faith. The lack of a tangible booty did not stop the destruction. Philip had already begun the campaign and could not turn back. Although he found no gold, he did take possession of fortresses, weapons, herds, and documents. That strengthened the French state. But the legend of the treasure did not disappear. On the contrary, it grew with each decade. Even today, some still seek the cursed treasure. They excavate in abandoned castles, study medieval codices, cross oceans, but everything seems to vanish like smoke. Perhaps because there is nothing to find, or perhaps because it was hidden so cunningly that its time to be revealed has not yet come. In Scotland, it is said that some Templars survived and founded secret societies, among them the origins of modern Freemasonry. For some, the treasure was used to finance new structures, but these ideas, though fascinating, lack solid historical backing. The line between myth and reality is blurred. The curse of the treasure was not about what it contained, but what it provoked: ambition, persecution, betrayal. The desire for possession led a king to destroy an ancient order. Philip sought power, but found dishonor, and the world lost one of medieval Christianity's most powerful institutions. Jacques de Molay knew he could not prove what did not exist. His silence was not obstinacy, but dignity. He would not betray his brothers, nor invent falsehoods to please the king. His truth was simple. The temple did not hide gold, but faith, and that faith could not be confiscated. The cursed treasure was not buried in any crypt, but in collective memory. Throughout the centuries, it was fueled by books, films, conspiracy theories. But what was truly cursed was the greed of the powerful, a greed that even today, centuries later, continues to resonate as a warning. Chapter 10: Accusations and Heresy. Following the raids on Friday, October 13, 1307, chaos engulfed the kingdom. Hundreds of Templars were arrested without prior trial or right to defense. Philip IV needed to justify the attack. He would do so with a battery of carefully crafted accusations centered on the worst crime of his time: heresy. The accusations against the Templars were not accidental. The king had instructed his men to use old rumors that had circulated since the Crusades. They claimed the Templars worshipped pagan idols, spat on the cross, denied Christ, and practiced secret rites, all without material evidence. The first interrogations, conducted under torture, yielded the expected results. Several knights, disoriented by pain, confessed what the inquisitors wanted to hear. Others died before speaking. Philip compiled these confessions and presented them as irrefutable evidence. The Pope, pressured, had no choice but to open an investigation. Among the most widespread accusations was the existence of a figure called Baphomet, supposedly worshipped by the Templars. The accounts varied. Some spoke of a bearded head, others of a demonic statue. None of these objects were ever found, but the myth was born and clung to the collective imagination. They were also accused of kissing each other on the mouth, navel, and base of the spine as part of an initiation rite. This was used as proof of moral corruption. However, modern studies attribute it to malicious distortions or confessions extracted by force. Heresy was more political than theological. Pope Clement V from Avignon found himself between two fires. On one hand, his duty to the Templars, whose existence had been authorized by Rome. On the other, he had to appease the French king, who supported the papacy with his military and economic power. His neutrality became silent complicity. To give an appearance of justice, Clement convened a papal commission. This commission visited various regions of France, collecting testimonies. Some Templars testified freely, denying all accusations. Others, fearing further torture, repeated their confessions. The climate of fear made it almost impossible to know the truth. Jacques de Molay was interrogated again in Paris. At first, he reaffirmed his innocence. Then, under pressure, he signed a limited confession, admitting that some rites might have been misinterpreted. But he soon retracted, declaring he had lied out of fear. His retraction was ignored by the authorities. The judicial process became a political spectacle. Philip organized public sermons to condemn Templar heresy. Posters with the supposed confessions were put up in Paris. Citizens, many of whom had been protected by the order for decades, began to doubt. Fear replaced respect. Civil and ecclesiastical authorities used the accusation of heresy to legalize theft. Assets were confiscated, temples closed, crypts desecrated. Libraries were dispersed, many works burned. The Templar knowledge accumulated over centuries vanished in the fire of ignorance. In other countries, kings reacted cautiously. In England, for example, Edward II initially refused to believe in Templar heresy, but under papal pressure, he ordered arrests. In Aragon and Portugal, monarchs investigated but found insufficient evidence. Only in France was the condemnation total and absolute. Templars who refused to confess were imprisoned indefinitely or executed. Those who admitted guilt could receive partial indulgences but were expelled from the order. This created a network of manipulated confessions where truth dissolved amidst screams and tears. Faith was used as a weapon. Philip's objective was not spiritual. He used the term heresy as a disguise. What he truly desired was power, control, and wealth. And to achieve it, he was willing to pervert the religious system. The very system that was supposed to protect the innocent became a tool of torture and silence. Justice was chained. Clement V, trapped by his own weakness, tried to regain control. In 1308, he convened the Council of Poitiers. He interviewed Templars who vehemently denied the accusations, but Philip prevented Jacques de Molay from testifying before the council. Truth had no place in the trial of the century. The trial records show blatant contradictions. Templars who first confessed, then retracted. Accusations without witnesses. Supposed idols never found. Juridical logic was replaced by the logic of fear. The tribunal sought not to clarify, but to confirm a predetermined sentence. The Vatican was forced to issue the bull Pastoralis Praemunentiae, ordering the arrest of all Templars worldwide. But many countries applied it with reservations. They did not believe the accusations. France, however, had already crossed the point of no return. Heresy became an instrument of state. Jacques de Molay, isolated, watched what he had built crumble. He knew his innocence would not save him, but he would not yield to lies. In every declaration, he reaffirmed his faith in Christ and the order. He rejected Baphomet, denied the blasphemous rites. His voice was weak, but unshakable. The few Templars who remained free were socially persecuted. They were forbidden from holding office, carrying weapons, or entering monasteries. The word Templar changed from a symbol of honor to a synonym for betrayal. Philip had managed to reverse the meaning of history, but he could not erase memory. The chapter of vows. The Templar accusations is one of the darkest pages of the Middle Ages, an era where dogma was manipulated by the crown, and the innocent silence was worth less than the tortured's cry. Truth was crucified, and heresy became an excuse to annihilate those who hindered power. Chapter 11. Judgment in Darkness. The trial against the Order of the Temple was a farce from its beginning. There was no impartiality or right to a real defense. Decisions were made before hearing the accused. The crown needed culprits, and the Inquisition took charge of fabricating them in the name of justice. In Paris, the Templars were imprisoned in inhumane conditions. Darkness, dampness, chains, and silence were their only companions. Many waited months or years without knowing what they were formally accused of. When finally called, they faced hostile judges and loaded questions. Jacques de Molay was presented before the inquisitors as a symbol of the entire process. His testimony carried weight, and they knew they had to break him. The interrogation was long, meticulous, and full of traps. But Molay remained serene, firm, without losing dignity or faith. Some witnesses were Templars who, under torture, repeated what they had been forced to say. Others were declared enemies of the order seeking revenge or favors. Physical evidence was non-existent. There were only words, and those words were bathed in fear and blood. The Church, pressured by Philip IV, allowed hearings to be held without the presence of defense lawyers. Documents were drafted in Latin, inaccessible to many of the accused. The manipulation was so evident that even some bishops began to express doubts, but the king silenced them. In 1310, several Templars in Paris publicly retracted their previous confessions. They declared that they were obtained through unbearable torments. They bravely affirmed their innocence. Philip responded with brutality. He ordered them burned alive as relapsed heretics. Thus, terror was imposed over truth. The trial dragged on for years. Hearings were irregular and often suspended without notice. Templars spent long periods without communication while their assets were distributed. The process did not seek justice, but to justify a carefully orchestrated plunder. Truth was chained in the dungeons. Molay tried several times to speak with the Pope. He wanted a fair, canonical trial under Vatican authority, but Clement V, weakened, could barely maneuver. He was surrounded by legates of the French king who monitored every word. His decisions were mere reflections of fear. In cities where there was still Templar support, such as Cyprus or Portugal, the trials were different. There was respect for procedure and review of evidence, but in France, everything was contaminated. The darkness of the trial eclipsed any hope of justice. It was a machine designed to destroy. The bull vox in excelso had not yet been issued, but the order's fate was already sealed. Philip would not allow its survival. Jacques' statements were carefully manipulated in the records. His words were summarized, distorted, or directly omitted if they did not serve the official narrative. The Inquisition also examined the order's internal rituals, oaths of obedience, vows of poverty, symbolic gestures. Everything was reinterpreted as signs of paganism or esoteric practices. A narrative was constructed where the sacred was turned into heresy and the pious into a conspiracy against faith. The most serious sessions were held behind closed doors, without witnesses, without impartial chroniclers. Only the executioners, the king's scribes, and the torturers knew what happened there. The minutes of those meetings were sealed. Some survived, others disappeared in convenient fires. The trial was a thick shadow. During the trial, names of other orders and noble figures emerged. Attempts were made to link the Templars to political plots and secret alliances. There was even talk of pacts with Islam. The intention was to destroy not only the order but its legacy and any possibility of future restoration. Templar reputation lay in ruins. Merchants withdrew their dealings, monks avoided them, and the people began to fear them. What was once a symbol of nobility was now a stain of suspicion, all achieved through a trial full of falsehoods, yet effective in its propaganda. In 1312, Clement V convened the Council of Vienne. Under pressure, he declared the dissolution of the order, not for proven heresy, but for the public scandal caused. It was an ambiguous formula designed to avoid confrontation with the king. Truth was sacrificed for political convenience. Molay was not immediately executed. He remained imprisoned for 2 more years, awaiting a final decision. During that time, he refused to retract his faith. Despite promises of pardon, he would not yield to lies. His dignity grew with each day of confinement. He prepared for the end. Many trial documents were hidden for centuries. In 2007, the Vatican published some in the Processus contra Templarios. It was revealed that the order had been acquitted by the Papal Commission in 1308, but that absolution was never respected by the French monarchy. The trial continued to ignore the facts. This chapter of history shows how corruption can seize faith, how power manipulates truth, and how an ancient institution can be destroyed by ambition. The Inquisition, which was supposed to defend orthodoxy, became an accomplice to an injustice that would resonate for centuries. Jacques de Molay, even under threat of death, never admitted to having betrayed God. His final testimony was a song of resistance. The trial failed to break his spirit, and in that act of courage, he became a symbol of dignity in the face of oppression. The judgment in darkness did not end with a sentence, but with a bonfire. And from those flames, a truth was born that neither power nor history could bury. That not all justice comes from men, and that there are silences more powerful than 1,000 words. Chapter 12. Pain, Torture, and Silence. In the damp, dark dungeons of France, the surviving Templars were subjected to brutal torments. Justice was not sought, but confessions that would feed a convenient narrative. Pain became method, and silence, sentence. No one was safe under Philip's crown. The methods of torture were varied and systematic. The wheel stretched limbs until they fractured. The rack tore tendons, red-hot irons were applied, and the accused were plunged into icy water. Suffering was ritualized, disguised as legal interrogation. Knights were denied rest and food. They spent days without sleep, wrapped in rusty shackles. Some lost their minds, muttering prayers between sobs. Others simply fell silent, as if their souls had fled their bodies. Dignity was the first sacrifice in those cells. Many Templars confessed to crimes they never committed. They invented names, rites, and pacts just to avoid further torment. The Inquisition carefully recorded these statements. Every false word became divine proof of guilt. Pain created fictitious truths that pleased power. Jacques de Molay was also tortured, though not to the same extent as his younger brothers. They knew they needed his testimony as a symbol. Still, he endured beatings, isolation, and psychological pressure. His mental fortitude was legendary. Every refusal of his echoed through the walls of injustice. Some Templars died before reaching trial. Their bodies were thrown into mass graves without name or cross. Others, physically and spiritually broken, signed whatever was put before them. The system sought not only to destroy the order, but to erase any trace of its honor and memory. There were knights who resisted to the very end. They preferred martyrdom to false pardon. They shouted their innocence amidst flames or in their last breaths. Their voices, though muffled by centuries, left their mark in the annals of history. Courage was written in blood and ash. Torture instruments were stored in monasteries and castles. Some, like the Iron Maiden or spiked belts, caused horror even among the executioners. But fanaticism, fueled by the king and his allied bishops, justified any method. Pain was divinized. The Inquisitor monks blessed the chambers before sessions. They claimed to act in the name of God, but their eyes reflected no compassion, only blind obedience. Faith became cold, calculating, inhuman. The gospel was replaced by confessions dictated under torment. In some testimonies, non-existent rites such as human sacrifices or demonic invocations were mentioned. These fantasies were celebrated by the crown as discoveries. Popular credulity fed on morbid curiosity. Templars transformed from heroes to monsters in the collective imagination. Interrogators recorded every moan and every tear. The records were sent to the Vatican, where some clerics began to suspect. But the distance and Philip's control prevented effective intervention. Rome saw, but did not act. Papal silence sealed the French dungeons. In Tours, Rouen, and Poitiers, dozens of Templars were executed after lightning-fast trials. Not even their names were divulged. They were buried in secret, as if truth itself were contagious. The crown feared not only the order, but the history it could tell. Some scribes, moved by what they witnessed, hid fragments of testimonies. These reflected the system's brutality. These documents would reappear centuries later, revealing the true face of the process. They were seeds of truth planted in dark soil. Fear spread beyond the prisons. Relatives of Templars were persecuted, their assets confiscated. Merchants and clerics who sympathized with them were watched or sanctioned. Repression was not only physical, but social and spiritual. Silence was imposed as unwritten law. Molay maintained composure but suffered for his men. Every piece of news of death tore him apart inside. His cell became a sanctuary of prayer. He did not pray for his salvation, but for justice. Every day was a battle against despair. Tortures continued until the effect was irreversible. The body broke, but the soul sometimes resisted. The word Templar transformed into a synonym for silent resistance. Some Templars left inscriptions on the walls carved with nails or pieces of metal. Messages like "God sees" or "We are still pure" adorned the stone walls. They were mute cries, pleas to the future. They knew their end was near, but they wanted someone in another time to know the truth. Pain had not destroyed their conviction. The torturers rarely looked into their victims' eyes. They knew that despite the power of their methods, there was something in the Templars they could not break. It was faith, not in the institution, but in an ideal. Truth does not need to shout to impose itself. Torture failed to achieve its main objective, a total and uniform confession. Every Templar said something different, and the contradictions were evident. But power did not care. It only needed headlines, rumors, fire. The subsequent silence would serve to bury what could not be proven. History did not forget those chambers of pain. Although for centuries attempts were made to cover up the truth, the echoes persisted, and in every rescued testimony, in every sincere chronicle, the Templar cry re-emerges. Pain, torture, and silence could not defeat memory or dignity. Chapter 13. The Last Challenge. Jacques de Molay, though imprisoned and weakened, kept his Templar spirit intact. He knew a definitive decision was approaching. It was not just about his life, but the honor of the entire order. Every breath he took carried the weight of centuries of legacy. The pressure on him was immense. Philip IV demanded a public confession. Rome wavered, and the people murmured. Molay had to choose between retracting and saving his life, or standing firm and facing martyrdom. The Grand Master understood that this moment would define history. In March 1314, a final public appearance was arranged. Molay was led in chains, his face gaunt but defiant. Beside him was Geoffroy de Charnay, another loyal Templar. Both knew this was not a trial, but a political spectacle. The charges were read before an expectant crowd. It was expected that Molay would accept his guilt, thus closing the cycle begun years ago. The authorities were ready to proclaim the king's justice, but Molay unexpectedly raised his voice. With firmness, he declared that all his previous confessions had been extracted under torture. He asserted that the order was innocent of heresy, idolatry, and corruption. His voice, though aged, resonated like a sword piercing the air. The crowd fell into absolute silence. The act defied both the king and the pope. The defiance was not just verbal, it was moral and spiritual. Molay chose sacrifice over lies. The courage of his words surprised even his enemies. No one expected such bravery after so much torment. Philip was stunned by the scene. His face revealed fury and discomfort. He had lost control of the script. What should have been a surrender transformed into an eternal testimony. Molay's words demolished the narrative carefully constructed by the crown. The king could not allow that declaration to circulate. He ordered the immediate execution of Molay and Charney without consulting the Pope. The urgency revealed fear, not justice. The Grand Master's defiance had wounded the heart of power. The time for the sword was over. The pyre was prepared on the Ile de la Cité in the very heart of Paris. Thousands of people gathered, drawn by the rumor of the execution. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others out of devotion. Many, without knowing it, would witness an act of eternal dignity. Molay was tied to the stake without trembling. His eyes looked to the sky with serenity. He asked for no pardon, nor did he cry for mercy. He only asked that his soul be given to God. His lips murmured prayers as the flames began to consume the damp wood. Geoffroy de Charnay accompanied him, praying fervently. Both shared a holy death, not a defeat. The crowd watched in silence. That fire burned not only bodies, but the lies surrounding the process. The scene was etched into Paris's memory. Before the smoke completely enveloped him, Molay uttered a final curse. With a strong voice, he invoked divine justice against the king and the pope. He said that both would follow him before God within a year. His words were not ignored, but feared. The execution, far from silencing history, ignited it. Many began to doubt the official narrative. Molay's courage became legend. He was a knight who chose truth in the face of death. Faith burned stronger than the pyre's fire. A few days later, rumors of miracles began to circulate. Some claimed to see a knight's silhouette in the flames. Others dreamed of him dressed in white, riding a fiery horse. Molay's figure transcended physical death. In Rome, Pope Clement V learned of the execution. His reaction was one of surprise and discomfort. He had not approved the punishment, though he had not prevented it either. Within a few months, he fell gravely ill and died. The first echo of the curse was fulfilled. Philip IV also suffered a similar fate. His health declined abruptly that same year. He died unexpectedly amidst whispers of divine punishment. The French began to fear the consequences of having destroyed the Templars. Power had not protected them from eternal judgment. Molay's execution marked the official end of the order, but also the beginning of its myth. He became a symbol of loyalty, faith, and resistance. His final defiance would inspire future generations. The fire that consumed him did not extinguish his legacy, it ignited it. His figure began to appear in secret texts, forbidden chronicles, and esoteric rituals. Some believed his spirit protected the last secrets of the temple. Others revered him as a martyr. History could not confine him to a tomb. Jacques de Molay's last challenge was not against a king, nor even against the Pope. It was against corruption, lies, and the abuse of power. It was an act of absolute faith, of complete surrender until the end. His example illuminated the centuries to come. Today, his name still burns in history as a living flame. In every Templar account, his voice rises. In every symbol of justice and courage, his figure resurfaces. The last challenge was not a defeat. It was the triumph of spirit over oppression. Chapter 14. Fire in Paris. News of Jacques de Molay's execution spread like wildfire. Paris awoke to rumors of justice and heresy, of valor and betrayal. The square where the pyre stood was marked forever. People commented that the fire had illuminated the Grand Master's face. The atmosphere in the city was heavy, laden with fear and guilt. Many began to murmur that something dark had been unleashed. Churches filled with faithful praying for forgiveness. The echo of Molay's last words kept the powerful from sleeping. Paris, the kingdom's capital, had become the stage for a spiritual tragedy. It was not just the death of a man, but the burial of a legacy. The temple's gates were closed. Its walls, which once inspired respect, were now a source of superstition. Nobles avoided mentioning the Templars aloud. Merchants whispered of the curse. Some claimed to have seen strange shadows cross the streets near the execution site. The city could not escape what it had witnessed. Philip IV tried to restore order through decrees and silence. He ordered inscriptions erased, Templar symbols destroyed, and witnesses silenced. But the fire that had consumed Molay was impossible to extinguish. It had ignited something in the collective consciousness. In monasteries, monks debated Molay's soul. Some considered him a martyr, others a traitor. But all agreed that his death had not been clean. There was pain in the air, as if the entire city carried a sin. Surviving Templars hid or fled the kingdom. They knew punishment could reach them at any moment. Some sought refuge in Scotland, Portugal, or in the shadows of France itself. Others changed their names and abandoned the sword. The temple's properties were confiscated by the crown, but strangely, many assets disappeared without a trace. Archives, treasures, and secrets vanished in the confusion. Many believed it was the work of the remaining faithful. The people began to place candles at the execution site. Without official organization, a kind of secret sanctuary was born. Every night, new lights appeared. It was a silent act of respect, a wordless prayer for Molay's soul. Tales of prophetic dreams increased. Ordinary people claimed to have seen the Grand Master warning of an era's end. Children cried when passing near his death site. Something in the atmosphere had broken forever. Nearby buildings began to deteriorate rapidly. Some said it was the consequences of injustice. There was talk of heavenly punishment, of a judgment higher than that of the king or the pope. The fire in Paris had not ended with death. The clergy tried to divert the conversation to other topics. They preached about obedience and humility, avoiding Molay's name, but glances kept returning to the same spot, where the pyre had stood. Truth burned brighter than flames. The temple's architects were persecuted. It was feared they could secretly rebuild the Templar legacy. Philip ordered former Templars watched, even the elderly. No spark should rekindle the fire he believed he had controlled, but the flame had moved to the people's hearts. Molay became a symbol of bravery. His name was written on alley walls. Future generations would remember that fire as the beginning of something new. Abroad, neighboring kingdoms watched cautiously. Some condemned the act, others celebrated it in silence, but all understood that the temple had been destroyed not by weakness but by threat. It had been feared, not vanquished. In Paris, the nobility began to fear a spiritual revolt. The people did not forget. The image of a knight burning with dignity was too powerful. Molay's words were repeated in corners like a rebellious prayer. Guilds began discreetly using Templar symbols, a cross here, a shield there. The fire had become a message. Forbidden knowledge began to circulate through books and rituals. The flame burned among the letters. Paris was no longer the same city. It had lost more than a man. It had lost part of its soul. The night brought echoes of hooves and ancient prayers. The temple continued to walk in the shadows of its streets. The fire in Paris not only consumed a body, but awakened a legend. And in every flame, in every murmur, the name of Jacques de Molay rose like a beacon, not of defeat, but of memory. Thus, as the ashes scattered, the true fire began in hearts. The Grand Master had died, but the temple had passed into the world of the eternal. Paris burned not in fire, but in consciousness. Chapter 15. The Curse of the Temple. On March 18, 1314, history changed in flames and words. Jacques de Molay, before dying, raised his voice from the pyre. With solemnity and firmness, he cast a burning prophecy. He summoned Philip IV and Pope Clement V to the divine tribunal. Molay did not scream, did not beg, did not break. His face, blackened by smoke, maintained the dignity of a knight. Amidst the crackling of wood, he said that within less than a year, both would die. The words pierced the square like ignited daggers. Many thought they were final deliriums. Others felt a shiver run down their spines. Authorities tried to downplay the scene, but witnesses guarded the moment with reverent fear. Weeks later, Pope Clement V fell gravely ill. Pain consumed him without apparent cause. In Vienne, surrounded by helpless doctors, he exhaled his last breath. His lips murmured prayers, but he found no peace. Philip IV also began to show signs of decline. The king, once strong and decisive, lost energy. Physical ailments, nightmares, and distrust surrounded him. His mind seemed burdened by an invisible weight. On November 29th of the same year, Philip died unexpectedly. His horse threw him during a hunt, and he never recovered. His fall was as sudden as it was mysterious. The kingdom shuddered, remembering Molay's words. The prophecy had been fulfilled with chilling precision. Many began to speak of a curse. It was not just a coincidence, they thought, but divine justice. The fire had unleashed eternal judgment. Philip's sons also did not escape punishment. Louis V died young and under suspicious circumstances. Philip V and Charles IV also met truncated fates. The Capetian dynasty ended with them, just as Molay predicted. People began to whisper about the cursed king. The Capetian lineage became synonymous with tragedy. Every death was seen as a consequence of a sacred crime. The French crown carried an inescapable shadow. Later popes avoided discussing the case. The Vatican closed related documents for centuries. Secret archives of the Templar trial remained sealed. The fear of truth weighed on the church. The Templars disappeared, but their story burned in the imagination. Every monarch who ascended the throne looked back. The specter of Molay remained present in political decisions, a silent warning in every hall of power. In France, many places where Templar Strongholds stood were abandoned. It was said they brought bad luck or awakened spirits. Religious orders avoided occupying those spaces. The energy there was too dense. Peasants told stories of lights and ruins. Some claimed to see faceless riders crossing the fields. The old folk said they were the Templars marching in vengeance. The curse had become legend. Even within the European nobility, the Templars were spoken of with fearful respect. No one wanted to bear such a monumental betrayal. Molay's execution was seen as an irreparable mistake. Repentance hovered over generations. During the following centuries, secret societies emerged. Many claimed to have a connection with the original temple. They said they protected its legacy, its wisdom, its spiritual treasure. For some, the curse was a pact. Forbidden books described rituals of atonement. Some nobles tried to clear their family names. Others sought ancient Templar manuscripts for protection. Knowledge was power, and also redemption. Medieval literature incorporated the curse in verses and chronicles. Troubadours sang about the betrayed Grand Master. Their songs were whispers of warning and reverence. Molay became a living legend. Over time, the temple's curse ceased to be merely religious. It became a symbol of resistance against injustice, against the abuse of power, against betrayal. An eternal flame that inspired future movements. Molay was not just an executed man, but a voice that crossed centuries. His curse marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. History judged him differently from his executioners. In the people's memory, he was always the just one. And so, while kings' names faded into dust, Jacques de Molay lived on. In books, in abandoned temples, in nocturnal legends. The temple's curse was the justice that history could not deny. Chapter 16. Secrets Never Revealed. When the Templars were arrested in 1307, many secrets remained hidden. Not all archives were destroyed, nor all truths revealed. Some manuscripts escaped the Inquisition's grasp. Their content continues to defy historical understanding. In various abbeys, cryptic symbols were discovered, inscriptions that blended Latin, Hebrew, and Templar ciphers. These writings spoke of initiatic rites and reserved knowledge, nothing the Church wished to divulge to the world. The Knights of the Temple were not just warriors, they were also bankers, builders, and scholars. In the East, they absorbed knowledge from ancient civilizations. This knowledge enriched their practices and their worldview. Templar rituals included symbolic acts of commitment and silence. The order was a secret brotherhood with levels of initiation. Only a few gained access to the deepest mysteries. Loyalty was sworn unto death. In a letter found in Dome, the Testament of the Grail is mentioned. This text of uncertain existence would have detailed the custody of a sacred object. Its spiritual or symbolic power concerned kings and pontiffs. It was never found. Some believed it was the Holy Grail. Others suspected ancient Crusader relics or heretical parchments. Whatever it was, it caused fear among authorities. Its search was as intense as it was fruitless. Several theories suggest it was taken to Scotland. Fugitive Templars are said to have formed secret networks in the Highlands. In isolated castles, they protected their symbols and manuscripts. Some believe these circles influenced later societies. In Languedoc, the Templars maintained contact with the Cathars. They shared spiritual ideas that challenged established dogma. The connection between both orders has been a subject of debate. What is certain is that both were exterminated with violence. During the trials, the name Baphomet repeatedly arose. Several Templars were accused of worshipping this figure. Under torture, some confessed to having seen or worshipped it. The image became central to the accusations of heresy. Baphomet was never a material, figure, or an idol found in temples. It was a name mentioned in confessions under torture without physical or documentary backing. Its image was presented as a demonic symbol. The Inquisition used it as central evidence to accuse the Templars of idolatry. In recent excavations under Templar churches, hidden crypts were found. Some contained coins, chests, and coded codices. Many were confiscated without official documentation. Their content still remains outside public access. The Templar Order. created an advanced financial system. They implemented loans, deposits, and letters of credit. This infrastructure gave them power and autonomy. It was one of the reasons that caused their downfall. In the Vatican archives, a crucial papal letter was discovered. Clement V secretly absolved the Templars. The document remained hidden for centuries. Truth was silenced to protect political interests. There were also maritime maps that defied the knowledge of the time. Some pointed to unknown Atlantic routes. Some believe the Templars sailed to America. There is no definitive proof, but suspicions persist. In Portugal, the order survived under another name. It became the Order of Christ, protected by the king. From there, they continued to influence maritime exploration. Their legacy intertwined with the great navigators of the 15th century. Templar churches reveal profound architectural knowledge. They were built with mathematical precision and esoteric symbolism. Every angle had a hidden meaning. They were more than temples. They were messages in stone. Many of their manuscripts spoke of the soul, time, and the universe, knowledge inherited from the ancients, reinterpreted in a Christian key. These ideas were incompatible with ecclesiastical power, which is why they were suppressed. Jacques de Molay knew many of these secrets. He never revealed them, not even under torture. His silence was a final shield for the order. He chose to die faithful to his vows. Templar secrets have not been fully revealed. They remain buried in ruins, in untranslated parchments, in forgotten symbols, and every generation returns to seek them, because there are still those who believe that the most valuable remains hidden. Chapter 17. The Fall of the Templars. The demise of the Templars was not immediate, but a slow demolition orchestrated with precision. From the massive arrest in 1307, the machinery of destruction did not stop. Philip IV, driven by his ambitions and debts, pressured the papacy and the courts. His goal was clear: to erase the order from the map. Pope Clement V, although initially showing doubts, eventually yielded to the monarch's pressure. To avoid confronting French power, he convened the Council of Vienne in 1311. Meanwhile, many Templars remained imprisoned in France, deprived of a fair trial. Their conditions were inhumane, and forced confessions continued to accumulate. At that council, the Pope officially dissolved the Order of the Temple. It was not due to conclusive evidence, but for reasons of prudence and public scandal. There was no definitive doctrinal condemnation, but an irreversible sentence. The decree was read solemnly. The order no longer existed. The Templar patrimony was transferred in theory to the Hospitallers, but in practice, many assets passed into the hands of nobles and crowns. The treasure accumulated over centuries was dismembered, hidden, or plundered. Fortresses were taken without resistance, and the brothers were dispersed. In other countries, the repression was lesser or almost non-existent. In Portugal, for example, the Templars were reintegrated as the Order of Christ. In Aragon, many were acquitted. Only in France was the persecution most intense and prolonged. There, political hatred disguised as religion was concentrated. The trials continued until 1314, while some brothers still hoped for redemption. Jacques de Molay, elderly and physically broken, was interrogated once more. Despite previous tortures, he remained firm in his last words. He rejected the false confessions imposed by the Inquisition. That retraction was his definitive sentence. Molay and other Templars were condemned to die for relapsed heresy. King Philip ordered a quick and silent execution. He desired no martyrs, only silence and oblivion, but what he got was history etched in fire. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay was taken to the Ile des Juifs on the Seine. There, along with Geoffroy de Charnay, he was tied to a wooden stake. There was no public trial or possible defense, only fire, ashes, and the astonished gazes of the Parisian people. According to chroniclers, Molay maintained his dignity until the end. Amidst the flames, he proclaimed the order's innocence and demanded divine justice. He asked God to judge the true culprits. His last words remained etched in the echo of history. Soon after, Pope Clement V died under sudden circumstances. King Philip IV also passed away in less than a year. These events fueled the legend of the Temple's curse. Many saw in this the prophetic fulfillment of the Grand Master's words. With Molay's death, the visible flame of the Templars extinguished, but their legacy was already embedded in collective memory. The order officially disappeared, but survived as myth, symbol, and enigma. What the sword failed to achieve, the pyre accomplished. The Church tried to close the chapter, but never issued a formal doctrinal condemnation. Centuries later, the Vatican would acknowledge errors in the process. Documents like the Chinon parchment, which acquitted Molay and other brothers, were found. Too late for the bodies, but not for history. The Temple's fall was not just the end of a military order. It represented the destruction of a system independent of secular power. The Templars were loyal to the Pope, not to kings. Their wealth and autonomy proved intolerable for rising crowns. Philip IV used the Inquisition as a political weapon. It was not a religious crusade, but a disguised coup d'état. He manipulated fear, faith, and law to liquidate his creditors, and succeeded in eliminating a military power without firing a single arrow. Internal betrayal also contributed. Some Templars confessed under torture and denounced their brothers. Unity fractured, further weakening resistance. Isolation among Templar houses prevented a coordinated defense. The press of the time, controlled by scribes in the service of power, spread rumors and accusations. Public opinion was cunningly manipulated. In the eyes of the people, the Templars ceased to be crusader heroes. They became heretics and conspirators. Without the right to reply, the black legend prevailed. Truth no longer mattered, only the dominant narrative. The ideals of poverty, chastity, and obedience were buried under mountains of slander. Only a few continued to defend their memory. The brothers who survived hid or integrated into other orders. Some fled to Scotland, others to neighboring kingdoms. The Temple as an institution was erased, but its network left traces in history, from architecture to financial knowledge. Many secrets disappeared with them: roots, relics, archives. There was speculation about hidden treasures and sacred manuscripts. The sudden disappearance of so much information only fueled the mystery. Thus, the eternal myth of the Temple was born. The fall of the Templars was not an act of justice, but of power. Ambition and fear destroyed what centuries of faith and blood had built. But truth, though buried, was not extinguished. Today, the world still seeks answers. The end was tragic, but also revealing. It reminds us how structures can be destroyed by the fear of free power. The Templars were not perfect, but neither were they monsters. Their fall was the long shadow of a changing world. Although the Order no longer rides through the Holy Land, its legacy still rides in memory. A memory of fire, iron, and dignity. The story of its fall is also the story of how ideals die and how they are reborn centuries later amidst the whispers of time. Chapter 18. Echoes of the Templars' Fall. The echoes of the Templars' fall resonated for centuries in European history and culture. The drama that enveloped the order marked a before and after in the perception of power and religious and political influence. The Templars, once symbols of strength and devotion, became figures shrouded in deep mystery and controversy. Their abrupt end created an ambiguous legacy that still sparks interest and debate among historians and the general public. After the official dissolution in 1312, stories about the Templars did not cease, and their memory was fueled by myths, theories, and popular legends. This phenomenon reflects how society interprets and transforms historical facts into broader narratives, full of symbolism and often far from reality. The persecution and trial left open wounds that many generations tried to understand, seeking answers to what happened in those dark years. The expulsion and dispersion of the Order's members led many to seek refuge in other territories or to integrate into new social and religious structures. Some took refuge in Scotland and Portugal, where legends claim they preserved secrets and riches that were never found. This has fueled the collective imagination with the idea of a lost treasure and hidden wisdom that the Templars would have jealously protected. Furthermore, the shadow of suspicion regarding the worship of dark symbols like Baphomet did not disappear, fueling conspiracy theories that link the order to occultism and esoteric mysticism. Although these ideas lack solid historical basis, they have contributed to creating a mysterious and enigmatic aura around the Templars. This phenomenon shows how history can be reinterpreted and used for different purposes at different historical moments. The Templar legacy also manifested in architecture and culture. Many fortresses and castles they built remain as testaments to their influence. These constructions, some in ruins, are visited by thousands of people who feel a fascination for the history and symbolism they represent. The Templar Order left an indelible mark on European geography and collective memory, serving as a source of inspiration for literature, cinema, and other forms of artistic expression. Templar influence extended to later political and religious aspects, affecting the relationship between monarchy and church. Their fall showed the danger that an order with so much autonomy and resources represented for established power. Thus, the history of the Templars serves as an example of how the struggle for control can shape the destiny of entire institutions. This historical event continues to be studied to better understand medieval power dynamics. The myth of the Grail, frequently associated with the Templars, adds another layer of mystery and symbolism to their legacy. Although there is no concrete historical evidence directly linking them to this legendary object, the popular connection has endured in Western culture. This blend of history and legend demonstrates how the Templars were absorbed by the collective imagination as guardians of transcendental secrets and forbidden knowledge. Throughout the centuries, numerous societies and groups have claimed ties to the Templar Order, seeking to legitimize their own beliefs and structures through this historical connection. This appropriation demonstrates the symbolic power that the Order retains, functioning as a symbol of resistance, mystery, and hidden power. In this way, the Templar name lives on beyond its real existence, influencing modern movements and esoteric currents. The Templars also inspired a wide range of literary works, from historical novels to fantasy and speculative fiction. Authors like Walter Scott and Umberto Eco have explored their history and legends in their writings, bringing the Templar figure closer to various audiences. This phenomenon contributes to keeping Templar memory alive, adapting it to the sensibilities and concerns of each era. The Templar narrative has become an important cultural reference. The fascination with the Templars also has a significant tourism component. Sites related to the order receive visitors from all over the world, being destinations that combine history, mystery, and architectural beauty. This attraction drives local economies and fosters interest in the preservation of historical heritage. Thus, the Templar legacy lives not only in books, but also in the tangible experience of its vestiges. In the academic field, the fall of the Templars continues to be the subject of rigorous investigations and debates. New documents and analyses allow for a better understanding of the historical context, legal processes, and political motivations behind their persecution. This work contributes to demystifying sensationalist aspects and offering a more balanced and evidence-based view. Templar history continues to evolve with each study. The echoes of the Templars' trial have also been interpreted as warnings about the dangers of intolerance and the abuse of power. The use of justice for political ends and the manipulation of evidence are themes that still resonate today. Therefore, Templar history offers valuable lessons for the critical analysis of judicial systems and authorities. Their fall becomes a symbol of historical injustice. Some researchers have pointed out that interest in the Templars reflects a human search for answers to mysteries and enigmas about the past. This phenomenon of fascination with the unknown shows how history intertwines with the desire to find meaning and connection with ancient roots. The Templars, with their aura of secrecy and tragedy, fulfill this role in the collective imagination. The combination of facts and legends nurtures this appeal. Furthermore, the representation of the Templars in art and popular culture has evolved over time, adapting to contemporary contexts. Films, series, and video games have reinterpreted their image, highlighting different aspects according to the desired narrative. This process of reinterpretation keeps Templar history alive, though sometimes mixing reality and fiction. The cultural influence of the Templars thus extends to multiple fields. Interest in the order has also raised controversies about the veracity of certain accounts and cultural appropriation. Debates among historians, writers, and enthusiasts highlight the difficulties in separating myth and reality. This constant dialogue is healthy for historical research, as it drives new perspectives and methodologies. The Templars continue to be a fertile field for study and reflection. Some contemporary groups have tried to revive symbolic and ritualistic aspects associated with the Templars, seeking to connect with a spiritual or philosophical legacy. However, these modern practices have no direct relationship with the original medieval order. This phenomenon demonstrates the power of Templar symbolism and its ability to inspire different forms of identity. Templar history transforms and reinvents itself over the centuries. The use of the Templar name and iconography in modern contexts also raises questions about historical memory and the ethics of appropriation. Respect for historical truth must be balanced with creative and spiritual freedom. This debate reflects the complexity of managing a legacy that has transcended its original context. The Templar image remains a powerful and multifaceted symbol. Finally, the story of Jacques de Molay and the Templar Order continues to fascinate because it combines universal elements: bravery, betrayal, power, and mystery. Its violent fall and the injustice suffered resonate as a timeless human drama. Through the echoes of time, its story continues to be told, analyzed, and reinterpreted, showing the enduring nature of certain narratives in human culture. This legacy remains alive in collective memory. This chapter seeks to offer a deep look at how the Templars' past continues to influence our perception of the world and contemporary culture. History does not end with their fall, but reinvents and adapts, inviting us to reflect on the relationship between power, faith, and myth. Thus, the echoes of the Templars endure, reminding us of the complexity of human history. Chapter 19. Curiosities and Legacy. The Knights Templar have left an indelible mark on history, culture, and popular imagination. Their story is full of fascinating facts and curiosities that enrich their legacy, often mixed with legends that have transcended time. From their founding to their fall, the order inspired not only respect and fear, but also a permanent interest that remains relevant in the modern world. One of the most striking curiosities is the mystery surrounding their symbols and emblems, which even today generate debates and speculation. The famous emblem of two knights on a single horse, for example, symbolized poverty and fraternity among members. This simple symbol reflects the philosophy of humility and companionship that guided the order, even though its power was immense. Another curiosity lies in the order's wealth and possessions, which not only accumulated lands and castles, but also managed an advanced financial system for its time. The Templars functioned as a kind of bank, guarding the wealth of nobles and kings. This economic activity was one of the reasons that generated distrust and envy among their political enemies, accelerating their downfall. It is also said that the Templars adopted innovative and very effective military techniques that allowed them to excel in the battles of the Holy Land. Their rigorous training and discipline made them a feared and respected force on the battlefields. This reputation contributed to the formation of their legendary image and the respect they inspired in both allies and adversaries. Templar rituals and ceremonies are also a subject of curiosity, as they blended religious elements with a strict hierarchy and codes of conduct. These rituals reinforced the knights' commitment and their sense of divine mission, generating a strong sense of belonging. Although many details have been lost or are uncertain, it is known that Templar life was rigorous and demanding. As for their architecture, the Templars left an impressive legacy in the form of fortresses, churches, and castles distributed throughout Europe and the Holy Land. These constructions, some still standing, reveal advanced knowledge in engineering and military defense. Many of these structures are visited today as historical heritage, showing the order's magnitude and reach. Templar influence also extends to popular culture, where they have been protagonists of numerous works of fiction, from novels and films to video games and comics. This dissemination has contributed to keeping their history alive, though sometimes distorted or dramatized. The fascination with the Templars remains a global phenomenon, reflecting their symbolic power and appeal. Among the lesser-known curiosities is the presence of women associated with the order, not as knightesses, but as family members or protectors. Although Templars were exclusively men, the network of family and social support was fundamental for their functioning and survival. These little-explored stories add a human and everyday dimension to Templar history. The spiritual and philosophical legacy of the Templars has also been a subject of reflection. Some believe that their pursuit of purity, honor, and justice represents an ideal that transcends time. Therefore, in certain esoteric and philosophical circles, they are considered symbols of universal values, although without direct connection to their historical practices. This dimension adds complexity to their memory. Up high, notable historical curiosity is the relationship between the Templars and other military orders, such as the Hospitallers or the Teutonic Knights. These orders competed and collaborated at different times, each with its own identity and mission. The comparative study of these orders allows for a better understanding of the political and military context of the Middle Ages, as well as power dynamics. The expulsion and dissolution of the order left behind numerous documents and records that are now valuable sources for historical research. These texts include testimonies, trial minutes, and correspondences that allow for reconstructing events with detail and precision. Access to these archives has helped to debunk myths and clarify many doubts about true Templar history. Some popular legends suggest that the Templars guarded secrets and sacred relics like the Holy Grail or fragments of the True Cross. Although these claims lack solid evidence, they have fueled the imagination of generations and enriched folklore. These stories reflect the human desire for mystery and the sacred, elements present in the Templar narrative. The impact of the Templars on the formation of medieval Europe is undeniable. Their role in the Crusades, the protection of pilgrims, and the defense of strategic territories contributed to shaping the continent's political and religious map. Their influence is perceived in institutions, laws, and traditions that endured long after their disappearance. Another interesting aspect is the transformation of the Templar image over the centuries. From villains in some narratives to heroes in others, their representation has been shaped by the cultural and political needs of each era. This phenomenon shows how history can be reinterpreted and adapted according to dominant values and beliefs. The Templars also influenced the development of medieval chivalry, establishing codes of conduct that would later be adopted by other orders and nobles. The concept of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice they promoted became an ethical benchmark for European nobility. This moral legacy is one of the order's most enduring inheritances. In terms of art and symbology, the Templars left a rich iconography that has been a subject of study and reinterpretation. Crosses, swords, the lamb emblem, and other symbols appear in different contexts, evoking the order's mystery and spirituality. This symbology continues to inspire artists and scholars, keeping Templar memory alive. A curious fact is that some surviving Templars participated in other orders or integrated into later social and political movements. Their experience and knowledge influenced new structures and strategies, indirectly perpetuating the Templar essence. This shows that official dissolution did not mean the total end of their influence. Medieval literature contains numerous references to the Templars, where they are portrayed as both heroes and antagonists. These literary representations reflect the ambiguity and complexity of their historical figure, which cannot be reduced to a single stereotype. The Templar narrative is multifaceted, rich in nuances and meanings. Academic interest in the Templars remains intense and global. Universities, museums, and research centers dedicate efforts to studying their history rigorously and objectively. This work has allowed for separating facts from fiction and providing new perspectives on their role in medieval history. The Order remains a topic of great relevance for history and culture. Finally, the legacy of the Templars is a testament to the power of history to transcend eras and cultures. Their story combines real facts, tragedy, mystery, and symbolism, elements that capture universal attention and interest. Thus, the Templars remain alive in collective memory, inviting us to explore and understand a fascinating and complex past.